For 12 years, the world around me had been quiet. Not peaceful, just quiet. The kind of quiet that amplifies everything unspoken, stretches the distance between people, and turns every smile into a puzzle I couldn't solve. My home in Beacon Hill, with its crown-molding, creaking staircases and sweeping views of the Charles River, had once been filled with music. Now it was a shell of polished hardwood and soft rugs, a place where sound had long since departed. The letter came on a gray Thursday morning. The envelope was discreet, the return address stamped with the logo of Boston Neurological Institute. I knew what it was before I even slid it open. My fingers hesitated over the thick cream paper. Part of me wasn't sure I wanted the world back. The appointment had been confirmed May 18th, 7:45 a.m. Dr. Grayson and his team were ready to proceed with the neural implant procedure. Experimental, yes, but the results in prior patients had been promising. 80% regained full auditory function within 6 months. The rest, at least partial hearing. Enough to distinguish voices. Enough to understand laughter without reading lips. Enough to hear someone lie. I folded the letter and slid it back into the envelope, then tucked it beneath a pile of old symphony programs in my desk drawer. I would tell no one. Especially not Adrien. He called once a week, sometimes less. His tone was always brisk professional, as if he were checking in on an elderly client whose estate he managed. Which I supposed wasn't far from the truth. Since my hearing loss, his visits had become shorter. His patience, thinner. He smiled, yes, but his eyes were somewhere else. Always calculating, always waiting. I needed to know. Without the performance, without the softened words tailored for the poor old mother who couldn't hear, I needed to hear what he said when he thought I wasn't listening. That night, I told Mireia. She was setting out tea in the sunroom, the late spring light spilling through the lace curtains. I watched the way her hands moved steady and precise, like always. I have an appointment, I signed slowly. Next Thursday, the surgery. Her eyes widened and her hand went to her mouth. Oh, Senora, she signed back. Praise God. I held up a finger. No one else can know. Promise me. She nodded, blinking back tears. You have my word. The teacups rattled slightly on the tray as she carried them to the table, and I sat quietly in the hush of the room, already imagining what the world might sound like again. Not the wind, not the birds, not the cello I used to play. I wanted to hear people. I wanted to hear my son. The next evening, Adrien arrived for dinner. Adrien arrived just after 6. The spring air was still cool, but he wore no coat, just his tailored navy blazer and the same cufflinks William once gave him at graduation. He breezed through the front door with that familiar burst of overconfidence, followed closely by Blythe, who kissed the air near my cheek with practiced ease. You look great, Mother Adrien said, drawing out each word as though speaking to a child. So elegant. Mireia's taking good care of you, I see. I smiled politely and offered a shallow nod. My notepad was already in hand, my pen gliding across the paper with muscle memory I no longer had to think about. Lovely to see you both. Dinner is nearly ready. Blythe clutched her handbag too tightly for it to be casual. Her eyes moved through the house like she was reading a floor plan, pausing at the crown, molding the antique sconce in the hallway, the rare painting above the fireplace. She looked at my belongings the way a buyer studies a staged listing. Adrien placed his hand on my shoulder briefly, more gesture than affection, and began speaking again. Carefully, enunciating eyes wide, as if I hadn't been reading lips for over a decade. We thought we'd check in, see how things are going, he said. Voice slow, syrupy. You've got a lot to manage in this house. Have you thought more about simplifying selling the vacation cottage, maybe consolidating the investment accounts? I kept my smile still. Beneath the surface, my fingers curled slightly on the notepad. I'll consider it. Let's eat first, I wrote. In the dining room, Mireia had outdone herself roast duck braised leeks, the white asparagus Adrien always liked. He complimented everything loudly, as if volume might translate to sincerity. Blythe said, little sipping her wine, offering the occasional nod or smile. Conversation, if you could call it that, flowed mostly one direction. Adrien updated me on market fluctuations, his recent promotion, how hard it was to find reliable staff. Occasionally, he paused to make sure I was keeping up, then offered summaries that bordered on patronizing. After dinner, I stood to clear the plates, and they waved me off, insisting Mireia would handle it. I moved toward the kitchen, but stopped just beyond the archway shielded by the corner wall. Their voices drifted through the house, faint but distinct. She's slipping, Blythe said. Did you see how long it took her to respond to the estate question? Adrien sighed. She won't need the townhouse much longer. We should get it transferred before the foundation locks it up. It'll be a mess to deal with once she's gone. Blythe said nothing, but I heard the soft clink of her wine glass as she set it down. I stepped into the kitchen, heart-steady hands no longer shaking. When they left, Adrien kissed my cheek again. Take care of yourself, all right? We'll come by again soon. I nodded and waved them off, then turned back inside where Mireia was drying the last dish. I opened the drawer, removed the envelope from beneath the symphony programs, and laid it flat on the table. In 7 days, I would hear them without hiding. The first thing I heard was the low hum of fluorescent lighting, then the rhythmic beep of a heart monitor, soft and steady. I kept my eyes closed, afraid that opening them might break the illusion. But the sounds didn't fade. If anything, they sharpened. A door creaked open. Footsteps approached rubber soles on tile. Then a voice, low and measured. Mrs. Marrow, can you hear me? I opened my eyes. Dr. Grayson stood over me, his kind face split by a cautious smile. I nodded slowly, then whispered the words I'd practiced in my head 1,000 times. Yes, I can hear you. The sound of my own voice startled me. It came out thinner than I remembered, uncertain, like a rusted hinge groaning back to life. But it was there, and it was mine. Dr. Grayson's smile deepened. Remarkable. Most patients don't respond this quickly. I barely registered his explanation of swelling and adaptation timelines. I heard everything now, the scratch of his pen on the chart, the soft murmur of a nurse in the hallway, the distant hiss of a coffee machine down the corridor. The world had returned, and with it, so had my purpose. Later that afternoon, Mireia arrived with a bouquet of lilacs and eyes already rimmed in red. She sat beside me and reached for my hand. It worked, she asked, voice trembling. I nodded and whispered, yes, it worked. Tears slipped down her cheeks. Gracias a Dios. I squeezed her fingers gently, but we don't tell anyone. Not yet. Her brow furrowed. You still want to pretend I turned my head toward the window where the blinds rattled faintly from the afternoon wind? They think I'm deaf. Let them. It's the one honest thing they've ever said to me. Mireia nodded, wiping her tears with the corner of her scarf. I'll follow your lead, Señora. Just tell me what you need. The next morning, they discharged me with a folder of instructions and a cautious green light to resume daily life with moderation. No loud noises, no overstimulation, gradual reintegration. But I wasn't interested in moderation. I had a house full of ghosts, a son full of secrets, and a voice no one knew I'd taken back. When we pulled up to the Beacon Hill townhouse and I stepped out into the bright morning air, I could already hear the locks turning inside. 2 days after the surgery, the house no longer felt like a tomb. It breathed again. Every tick of the grandfather clock, every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of fabric had a voice I'd forgotten. I moved quietly, adjusting to sound in layers, letting the walls teach me how alive they'd always been. Adrien called that afternoon. Mireia answered on the house phone as usual. I was in the study, the door half closed, when she brought the handset in and handed it to me with a wink. I pressed the speaker button and left it on the desk as I moved to the side just beyond view. "Yeah, I know the timing's tight," Adrien said, voice clipped. "But we're talking about temporary diversions. It's not like she even checks the balances anymore. We're managing her exposure." A pause. A laugh. "Yes, the trust structure's outdated. I'm working on that. Just move the funds into the holding account by Friday. Clean lines, no flags." He hung up before Mireia returned with tea. I kept my expression neutral and thanked her out loud before remembering myself. I scribbled a quick thank you on my notepad and passed it across the table. That evening, Adrien came by unexpectedly. "I'm bringing a colleague," he'd texted, "just to talk options. Don't worry, nothing formal." They arrived an hour later. I was in the parlor thumbing through a music anthology when they stepped inside. I didn't look up. I didn't need to. "This is the back sitting room," Adrien said to the stranger. "The lot line ends right past the garden wall, but the developer next door is willing to merge parcels. If we move quickly, we can get zoning approvals before things change." "She's okay with selling?" the man asked. "She's not exactly in a position to object," Adrien said, lowering his voice. I kept my hands still in my lap. The next morning, I called Warren Ellery. "I need a private audit," I said calmly. "Every account, every asset, every transaction tied to Adrien's name." He didn't ask questions, just a clipped, "Understood. I'll start today." We met later in his office where I dictated changes to a new will. Different allocations, charitable trusts, asset protections. Adrien's name removed from every control clause, but I told Warren not to file it. "Not yet. Hold it until I say otherwise," I said. "I need to watch a little longer." By the time I left the firm's glass building and stepped back into the bustle of Boston traffic, I could hear everything: the wheels of a stroller on the sidewalk, a distant bus, break the clipped chatter of passersby. I returned home before sunset. That night, the phone rang again. This time, it was Blythe. Blythe's voice floated up the staircase before I even realized she was in the house. I had left the study door ajar, my hearing aids tuned low to muffle the tinny hum of the city beyond the windows. She must have thought I was asleep. "She doesn't even blink anymore when you talk about her accounts," Blythe said, sharp with laughter. "It's like having a mute pet that owns a mansion." Adrien didn't respond right away. I heard the hesitation, a pause, a shift of weight, maybe even discomfort. "You shouldn't talk about her like that," he said finally. "Oh, please," she scoffed. "You said it yourself, she's not really here anymore. She's a signature. That townhouse is worth 4 times what it was 10 years ago. You said she wanted to support your future." "She did," Adrien muttered. "But I don't think she meant this." I leaned back in my chair, the silence between their words louder than anything they said. It wasn't guilt that stopped him. It was uncertainty. That made it worse somehow. When they left, Mireia came in with folded laundry and eyes that had seen more than they let on. "Why are you waiting?" she asked gently. "You have enough. The lawyer, the documents, the truth. You could end this now." I looked at her, the clean cotton of folded towels between us, and felt the ache deep in my chest again. Not rage, not even sadness. Something heavier. "Because I don't know who he is yet," I said. "I know what he's done, but not why. Not fully. I need to see the whole of him, all the way through. Was it always about the money? Or did something change along the way?" Mireia didn't answer, only nodded, her lips pressed together, like she was holding something she wasn't ready to say. She set the towels down beside me, one hand brushing my shoulder before she turned to leave. I stayed in the chair long after she had gone, listening to the ticking of the hall clock, the distant sound of a neighbor's piano drifting in through the vents. The next morning, Adrien called and asked if he could stop by again. Just the two of us. I have some ideas to go over, he said. I told Mireya to set the table for lunch. I asked Mireya to take the china down from the high cabinet, the one we used for William's retirement party and my last university dinner. She raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Just set the table with practiced grace, crystal stemware, silver cutlery cloth napkins, folded like lilies. I chose the Bordeaux from the cellar, one I knew Adrien wouldn't resist. It had aged better than some people I could name. They arrived right on time, blithe, in a sharp emerald dress, and Adrien in a pressed blazer, trying too hard not to seem eager. The scent of roasted duck filled the house, warm and familiar. Soft cello played in the background, a piece I used to teach. I watched their eyes flick toward the sound system, trying to gauge if I could still appreciate it. We sat, and they talked. About how busy the market had been, about their plans to simplify my estate, to ease the burden of ownership. Adrien laid it out carefully, never raising his voice, always tilting his words toward concern. You've done so much, Mother, he said gently, hands folded like a priest in a confessional. Let us take care of you now. Just a few signatures to relieve you of the logistics. Nothing would change day to day. Blythe nodded beside him, her expression sculpted in soft support. I sipped my wine and wrote in my notepad, "Let's enjoy dessert first." He smiled, perhaps mistaking my compliance for fatigue. After Mireya brought out the chocolate torte, Adrien reached into his briefcase and produced the folder. He slid it toward me like a final course. I had these prepared just in case you felt ready. We've reviewed them with a colleague, very standard clean transfers. The townhouse, the cottage, the investment account handovers. I ran my fingers across the top of the folder, then looked up. They were watching me, anticipating confusion, a pause, a scribble on paper. Instead, I spoke. Why such urgency to transfer what isn't yours? Adrien's mouth opened, but no sound came. Blythe's hand jerked, and the wine glass slipped from her fingers, shattering across the table. The music played on. He stared at me like I'd risen from the dead. You can hear I nodded once. For over a week. Blythe turned pale, fumbling for a napkin, avoiding my eyes. I've heard every word. The calls, the plans, the jokes about my silence. I heard it all. Adrien's color drained from his face as he sat back the folder, untouched between us. No one spoke for a long time. Even the cello faded into quiet. I reached forward, pulled the folder to my side, and said with finality, "Now that we're speaking honestly, we'll begin again." From the top. The doorbell rang before anyone could answer. Mireya glanced at me from the hallway. I nodded once. Let them in. It was Warren. Warren entered with his briefcase in hand, and a weariness that only came from knowing too much. He nodded politely at Adrien and Blythe, who stood frozen at the dining table. Mireya closed the door behind him and disappeared down the hall. I brought the files, Warren said quietly. I gestured for him to set them on the table. Adrien watched him with a flicker of recognition, then a tightening jaw. I pushed the dessert plates aside and unfolded the first set of documents. For the past 7 days, I said, voice calm. I've listened to every phone call, every whispered conversation, every lie delivered with a smile. I didn't say anything because I wanted to be sure. Warren confirmed the rest. I opened the ledger. You've transferred $1.8 million in unauthorized funds over the last year, layered through accounts masked as service invoices and maintenance costs. Adrien took a step forward, hands raised. It's not what you think. I was reallocating short-term positions to avoid tax hits. Backdoor deals with developers, I asked. A promised property swap for a luxury condo tower next door. Blythe cleared her throat. Celeste, this all feels very sudden. Maybe we should discuss this in private. I turned to her slowly. You laughed about me, called me a mute pet, watched him do this and encouraged it. You're not leaving just yet. Adrien's voice cracked. Please. You don't understand. You thought I'd never hear you, I said, not raising my voice. You thought silence was permission. Warren pulled out the new will and set it before me. This is the amended version, I said. Adrien is removed from all control and inheritance. The bulk of the estate will go to the conservatory. My home and music library will be converted into a scholarship residency for underprivileged students. Adrien's shoulders sagged. He looked at me, not with anger, but something closer to emptiness. You're cutting me out, he whispered. I looked at him. My son, the child I had once carried through sleepless nights and piano recitals and college deadlines. No, I said softly. You did that yourself. Warren closed the folder, gently collected his pen, and waited. I rose from the table, hands steady, and turned to Mireia, who had returned with coats in her arms. Let them go, I said. They've taken enough. The house was quiet after the door closed. Adrien didn't say goodbye. He simply took the papers Warren handed him, nodded once, and walked out with Blythe, trailing behind her heels, clicking sharp against the floor like punctuation marks. The door shut without ceremony. Mireia stood near the staircase waiting to see if I'd crumble. I didn't. The silence afterward felt different. Not heavy. Not empty. Clean. The days that followed passed in soft motion. I moved through the house like I was rediscovering it, each room full of sounds I hadn't heard in years. The faint squeak of a drawer, the steady hum of the refrigerator, the muffled crackle of the fireplace when the logs caught flame. One afternoon, I found myself drawn to the piano in the back room. It hadn't been touched since William's funeral. I sat down on the bench and lifted the fallboard slowly, running my fingers over the keys, like greeting an old friend I wasn't sure still remembered me. I played one note, then another, then a chord, and then I cried, not out of grief, but out of release. I played for hours that day. Not perfectly, not with the control I once had, but with a kind of rawness I had never dared to show before. My hands found their way back without asking for permission. Weeks passed, each one quieter in the best sense. I walked through the Boston streets in the early mornings, listening to the rustle of newspaper carts, the bark of dogs on their routines, the layered chorus of life that had once been background and now felt like invitation. Then one morning, Mireia appeared in the kitchen with a folded newspaper in her hand. She laid it gently on the counter beside my tea. He's teaching, she said. Adrien. There's a school in Dorchester underfunded small arts program. They hired him last week. Music instructor. I read the article slowly. His name was near the bottom, listed beneath a quote about restoring access to arts education. There was no mention of me. No mention of the money. Just a photo of him holding a battered cello with a small group of middle schoolers in wrinkled uniforms. I closed the paper and stared out the window for a long time. Maybe this was the version of him I was meant to see, stripped of legacy, stripped of entitlement, standing on his own. And maybe, just maybe, he'd begun to hear something too.